My name is Celeste Harrington, and for 3 years I paid every bill in the house while my parents treated me like I didn't exist. But nothing shattered me like the day I came home early and overheard my father say to someone on a video call, "She shouldn't have been born." That sentence didn't break me. It opened my eyes. This is the story of what happened next. How I sold the $830,000 house he was living in, walked away without a fight, and built a life where his words could never reach me again. If you've ever given your all to a family that only saw you as useful, I hope you stay for this story. It might just help you see your own worth a little clearer. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. The client presentation had gone better than I could have hoped. Every data point landed with impact. The questions I'd worried about didn't come, and those that did, I crushed. When I stepped out of that conference room, my manager Meredith Liang caught up with me near the elevators, grinning like she'd known all along. "Celeste," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you nailed it. Seriously, go home, take the rest of the day." "You deserve to breathe." Deserve. The word echoed in my mind, oddly hollow. I nodded, thanked her, and left the building, my heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. Outside, it was a perfect spring afternoon in Atlanta. Warm sun, soft breeze, the kind of day that practically begged for a glass of wine on a patio somewhere. I could have texted someone. I could have gone downtown and celebrated like any normal person after a career-defining win. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home. And not to my own private haven, but to the house my parents had been living in for the last 3 years. The one I bought. The one they never paid a dime toward. I didn't even fully understand why I went there. Maybe I still wanted to believe that deep down they cared. That maybe, just maybe, Dad would be proud of me today. That I'd walk in, say something like, "Guess who just landed the biggest account in the firm's history?" And he'd stand up, look me in the eye, and say he was proud. Just once. Their cars were in the driveway, parked as usual. Mom's white sedan next to Dad's dented pickup. My own newer SUV waited at the curb like a silent reminder of all the things they pretended not to notice. I took the side door in like I always did, entering quietly through the kitchen. I'd thought about grabbing a drink first. Maybe water, maybe wine, and giving myself a minute to rehearse the good news in my head. That's when I heard it. Dad's voice drifted from the den, his volume turned up too high on a video call. He was talking to someone. Probably his old construction buddy, Frank. His tone was gruff, familiar, relaxed in the way it never was with me. "Yeah, still here," he said, sounding almost bored. "We're still living in Celeste's place. The girl's got the house in her name, makes 6 figures or something. You'd think she's doing us some big favor." He chuckled. "She acts like a Queen Frank. Like we should be bowing to her just 'cause she pays the bills. Walks around like she's the damn president of the bank or something." My feet froze to the tile. Something cold crept up my spine. Frank's voice filtered faintly through the speakers. "She's still single." Dad didn't miss a beat. "Of course. 33. No man. No kids, just a job that she thinks makes her important. But if you ask me, Celeste's a failure. Should have never been born." The words didn't echo. They detonated. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the room demanding answers. Instead, something inside me locked up. My lungs forgot how to expand. The fluorescent light above the sink buzzed faintly, suddenly deafening. And then I heard more. Mom's voice joined in, gentle, almost amused. "She's so cold lately. You ask her anything personal, she flips the conversation back to tax codes or stock trends. She gave us those watches for Christmas," Dad scoffed. $3,000 between the two of them. "Just to show off." Mom laughed. It was tasteless. And exhausting. I'm tired of pretending to be interested in what she does. A silence followed. I wondered if they were smiling in that room, nodding in agreement about how unlovable I was. How inconvenient. How unwanted. I didn't stay to hear more. Carefully, like a ghost moving through the shell of a house, I turned and climbed the stairs. Each step practiced weightless. I passed the master bedroom, the one I gave them when they moved in after Dad's second bankruptcy. My name was on the deed, but they'd claimed the best room without hesitation. I opened the door to the guest room, my room. Sparse, too small for all I'd earned. I sat on the bed and stared at the hardwood floor. My hands rested flat on the blanket. No shaking, no weeping, just silence. Memories began to replay uninvited. Dad's refusal to come to my MBA graduation because Heather's toddler had a cold. The time I used my entire first-year bonus to pay off their mortgage arrears. The handmade pasta I cooked on Father's Day while he watched sports, ignoring every effort I made. And yet I never once thought they hated me. Until today. It wasn't just disappointment I felt. It wasn't betrayal. It was the stark realization that I had never been seen. Not truly, not even once. To them, I was a wallet with a heartbeat, a backup plan, a shield against their own failures. But that moment, the exact second those words hit me, I knew something had changed. Not in them, in me. I didn't cry because I wasn't broken. I was done. And somewhere deep inside, the first outlines of a plan began to form. Not for revenge, for freedom. 3 years before that afternoon. The one where my father's voice shattered the last illusion I had of family. My life had looked very different. Back then, I'd just bought my home in Seattle. A 3-bedroom craftsman with bay windows, a wraparound porch, and the kind of silence you could wrap around yourself like a quilt. It wasn't massive or showy, but it was mine. Every floorboard, every cabinet, every light fixture had been chosen with a mix of care and pride. A space I envisioned building a quiet, self-defined life in. I was 31 then. Single, yes, but not lonely. I had a solid circle of friends, a career that was finally gaining momentum, and a vision for a future that didn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. Until the phone call came. Dad's business went under. Mom had said, her voice heavy with a kind of breathless urgency, again. It's different this time, Celeste. He's not bouncing back. The pause that followed stretched, waited, and expectant. We just need a place to stay. Temporarily. A few months maybe while we figure things out. I'm not in great health either. The stress hasn't been kind. I didn't hesitate. I'd been raised to respond to support to provide. So I said yes. Douglas and Elaine arrived with 4 suitcases, 2 boxes, and 0 shame. Within a week, the master bedroom, the one with the ensuite and the view of the garden, was theirs. I moved into the guest room, telling myself it was just for now. They brought their favorite armchair, Dad's toolboxes, Mom's crystal vase collection. My clean, minimalist aesthetic was slowly drowned by doilies and framed crochet quotes. And then they never left. The months stretched into seasons and then into years. Their temporary stay morphed into an unspoken permanence. I paid for everything. The mortgage, of course. Plus utilities, car insurance, groceries, medication, phone plans. Dad looked for jobs sporadically, but always came home with stories of market downturns and ungrateful employers. Mom didn't even try. At my age, she'd laugh. No one wants to hire someone in her 60s with hypertension. So I picked up the slack. Quietly, reliably. My financial spreadsheets grew increasingly complex, with line items for their prescriptions, dietary preferences, and pet projects. I even bought a new hybrid sedan after Mom complained the old family car was too noisy. I told myself I was doing the right thing. That's what good daughters do. But goodness in that context felt like a contract I'd never agreed to. A contract that demanded everything and returned very little. Meanwhile, Melody, my younger sister by 5 years, floated through life like a favored leaf on calm waters. She'd married a man named Connor, whose family ran a local chain of car dealerships. She never finished college, but didn't need to. Her days were filled with playdates, Pilates, and Pinterest-worthy brunches. She had 3 kids by 29 and a kitchen full of copper pans she never used. To my parents, she was the golden girl. Our Melody always knew how to live a full life, Dad would say at dinner, not looking up as I served the pasta I'd cooked after a 10-hour workday. She's grounded, balanced, family-oriented. They never said anything outright about me, but silence can be louder than praise. Every Wednesday they came over for dinner. Melody, the kids. Connor. I cooked, I cleaned, I tried. But no matter how hard I worked or how carefully I set the table, it never felt like enough. When Melody shared a new family photo, they cooed and passed it around like it was a sacred artifact. When I mentioned a successful client meeting or a small raise, they nodded distractedly or changed the subject. One night, after the dishes had been cleared and the house was quiet again, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my bank app. The numbers were still strong, thanks to my discipline and planning, but the stress was beginning to show in places no ledger could capture. I hadn't gone on a vacation in 2 years. I skipped outings with friends because I couldn't justify the cost with 2 extra mouths to feed. I hadn't bought new clothes in months. My nails were bitten to the quick. My dreams of starting a small consulting firm were filed away in the someday drawer. Again. But I never said a word. Not to them, not to Melody, not even to Zoe, my best friend since college, who often looked at me with a mix of admiration and confusion. They're adults, she'd say over coffee, brows knit with worry. Why are you living like their parent? This isn't your responsibility. They're my family, I'd reply. Always that line. And I have the resources. It's not a big deal, but it was. And I knew it. Because I'd begun to lose track of the woman I'd worked so hard to become. The one who once stayed late at the office not to prove a point, but because she loved the work. The one who lit candles at dinner even when no one was watching. The one who used to dream of hiking Patagonia, writing a book, learning to sail. That woman was dimming quietly and completely. And in her place stood someone useful, dutiful, dependable, someone who paid the bills. Someone who disappeared behind everyone else's needs. Someone who'd been taught, over and over again, that love was a transaction and that her worth was measured in what she could give, not in who she was. That lesson ran deep, and for 3 years I lived it. My days began the same way every single morning. At 5:00 a.m., my alarm would buzz softly on the nightstand. I'd rise quietly so I wouldn't disturb my parents in the master bedroom just down the hall, the room I used to dream about claiming for myself. I'd pull on my leggings, tie my hair back, and head to the basement where I'd set up a modest home gym. The treadmill was old, a little loud, but reliable, like me. For 45 minutes, I ran. Not because I loved running, but because it was the only part of the day that belonged entirely to me. Just the rhythmic pounding of my feet and the illusion of control. Some mornings I imagined running straight out the front door and never stopping. Afterward came the usual routine. A protein smoothie, a shower, blazer heels makeup. I'd stop by the kitchen before heading out, where Dad would be nursing his coffee, scrolling aimlessly through job listings he never applied for. Mom would usually be at the dining table flipping through a catalog or halfway through her second piece of toast. Morning. I'd say like a gentle offering. Dad would grunt. Mom sometimes looked up, sometimes didn't. It wasn't always like that. But now the longer they lived with me, the more invisible I seemed to become. You don't have to do this. You know, Ivy told me one Friday during lunch. We were at a small bistro near my office, her eyes scanning my face with practiced concern. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. They're my parents, I replied, the words automatic, almost rehearsed. What would you have me do? Throw them out. She leaned in. I'd have you set a boundary. Celeste, at the very least. I looked down at my salad. That feels cruel. What's cruel is what they're doing to you. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to admit she might be right. That evening I came home to find the mail unopened, the dishes from breakfast still in the sink, and a faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. My parents were watching a cooking show in the living room, on the new flat-screen TV I'd bought last Christmas. "Promotion went through," I said after a moment standing near the staircase. "Oh," Mom said, not turning from the screen. "Assistant director. Comes with a raise." "That's nice, dear," Dad muttered, flicking the remote. "Hope it doesn't mean you'll be working even longer hours." There it was. Not congratulations, not pride, just a warning wrapped in apathy. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the hallway wrapping around me like static. That comment, that tone, it should have bounced off me, but it stuck, like so many other things lately. So I opened the Notes app on my phone and started typing. March 10th, promotion news. Dismissed. Said I might work too much. The next morning I added another. March 11th. Mom joked I don't know how to cook real food because I made quinoa. You and your fancy grains. Laughed. Dad nodded. I began noticing things I used to ignore. The slight eye rolls, the passive-aggressive remarks, the way they lit up when Melody called but looked bored when I talked about work. Or how Mom would sigh dramatically if I didn't offer to drive her to her hair appointment, even though she still had a car. March 15th. Melody's daughter lost a tooth. They FaceTimed and cheered. I told them I'd been invited to speak at a national finance summit. Dad said, "Don't let it go to your head." March 18th. Spent 2 hours assembling Mom's new shelf. She didn't thank me. Said it should have been done last weekend. By the end of the month, my notes were long, disjointed, but damning. They weren't acts of war. No screaming, no abuse. But it was something else. Something quieter. A steady erosion. It was in the way they talked about me like I was a paycheck with legs. The way their appreciation had an expiration date that lasted only as long as the next favor. The way their love felt like a ledger I was constantly trying to balance but never could. Still, I tried. Because I thought that's what good daughters did. I bought them gifts. Comfortable shoes, expensive supplements, a state-of-the-art humidifier for Dad's sinuses. I cleaned up after them, replaced broken furniture. I even got Dad a new laptop for Christmas so he could apply for jobs faster. He used it to watch poker tutorials and old westerns. One night, Ivy came over for dinner. It was a rare thing, me inviting someone into that house. She watched the way Dad barely acknowledged her, how Mom only asked about her love life and seemed bored by the answers. And after dinner, when she complimented my chicken marsala, Mom responded with, "Yes, Celeste always follows the recipe exactly. Not much of an improviser." After she left, Ivy sent me a text that wasn't just cold sell, that was Arctic. I stared at the screen for a long time, then opened my notes again. March 22nd. Ivy came for dinner. Mom insulted me in front of her. Dad said nothing. I didn't know what I was doing with the notes yet, but writing them gave me a sense of truth. A record that my experiences were real, that I wasn't exaggerating or being too sensitive. Because that's what they always said too. You're being dramatic. You're too emotional. You take everything so personally. But I wasn't. I was just paying attention. Finally, I didn't go back home that night. After hearing my father say I should have never been born, I couldn't bring myself to walk through the front door like nothing had happened. Instead, I drove with no destination in mind, headlights slicing through Seattle's damp evening haze. At some point, instinct took over. I turned onto Ivy's street without thinking. Her porch light was on. I remember sitting in my car for a full 3 minutes before knocking, trying to figure out how to tell her something I had never said out loud to anyone, not even to myself. She opened the door in sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair in a messy bun, face free of makeup, the kind of comfort that made you feel like nothing had to be explained. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" "No," I answered. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside immediately, no questions. Inside, she handed me a blanket and a mug of tea before I even sat down. I didn't cry. I just stared at the rim of the cup, steam rising and fogging my glasses. Finally, I said it. My dad said I should have never been born. She didn't gasp or try to soothe me with disbelief. She nodded once and waited. I told her everything. About the video call, the words I heard, the way my mother laughed and added her own shade of cruelty, how I didn't say anything, how I just left. I talked for almost an hour, words pouring out like a dam had cracked inside my chest. When I finally stopped, Ivy leaned forward and said, "Celeste, I don't think this started today. I think it just finally got loud enough that you couldn't pretend anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. We sat together on her couch, and slowly we began unraveling the past, not in dramatic epiphanies, but in quiet, painful moments. Ivy knew most of my story already. We'd been friends since undergrad, but even she hadn't known how much I'd edited myself to make it all sound okay. I told her how I gave up my study abroad opportunity in Paris during junior year because my parents said they couldn't afford my younger sister's braces otherwise. I told her about the time in high school when I forged my dad's signature on the mortgage extension because he was too drunk to do it himself, and how proud they were of me for handling adult things so well. I told her how every time I achieved something, there was always a way they reminded me not to get too big for my boots. I thought they were just bad at showing love, I said, staring at the steam rising from my tea. That maybe they meant well, they just didn't know how to express it. Or, Ivy said gently, they knew exactly what they were doing. They just didn't care what it cost you. I flinched at that. Not because she was wrong, but because deep down I already knew it was true. And that was the hardest realization of all. It wasn't that they didn't love me well. It was that they didn't love me as me. They loved what I gave them, what I made easier, what I absorbed. But they never once asked who I wanted to be when I wasn't performing, producing, or pleasing them. They hadn't raised a daughter. They'd raised a function. Later that week, I took Ivy's advice and booked a session with a therapist. Someone she recommended, someone who specialized in family dynamics and trauma. Her name was Dr. May Linton. She had kind eyes, soft gray curls, and a way of listening that made silence feel productive instead of uncomfortable. In our first session, I tried to downplay it all. I explained the situation with clinical precision. Detached, efficient, like I was delivering a quarterly report. She let me finish. Then she asked, "At what age did you start feeling responsible for your parents' well-being?" I paused, thought back, realized the answer was somewhere between the time I learned how to microwave dinner for myself and when I started hiding the final notices from the electric company. "Maybe 10, I said. "Maybe younger." She nodded. "What you're describing, Celeste, is called parentification." I blinked. I've never heard that word. It's when a child is placed in a caregiving role toward their parent. Sometimes emotionally, sometimes financially, sometimes both. You became the adult before you even had a chance to be a kid. The words unraveled something inside me. Not because they shocked me, but because they named something I had spent my whole life feeling but never being able to define. The weight, the guilt, the anxiety, the compulsion to fix everything, to be good, to hold it all together. It wasn't just personality, it was conditioning. Dr. Linton continued, "Children in that position often grow up to be high achievers. They become hyper-responsible, hyper-independent. They're praised for being mature, but inside they feel invisible, like love is always tied to usefulness." I swallowed hard. It was the first time I felt like someone had seen me. Not the version I polished for the world, but the tired, overextended, quietly aching version I kept buried under layers of competence. That night I opened the note file on my phone again. The one where I kept track of every little slight, every moment of being dismissed or belittled. But this time I titled a new entry April 2nd, First therapy session, learned a new word parentification. I didn't fail them. They failed me. And I saved it. The days following my realization were quiet. But not in the way silence used to be in my house. This quiet was different. It wasn't the silence of suppression or tiptoeing around judgment. It was the hush of planning, of clarity, of something solid taking root inside me. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't argue with the air or rehearse what I'd say if I confronted them. That chapter had closed the moment I overheard my father call me a mistake, a failure, a woman who should have never been born. Now my focus was singular. I was going to leave. Not just leave the house, not just take a break. I was going to sever the entire system I had upheld for years, this invisible structure where I played both provider and scapegoat. I started small. I created a spreadsheet the same way I did for my high-net-worth clients at the firm. Only this one wasn't for a portfolio. It was for my own liberation. I cataloged my expenses, my assets, my equity in the home. Then I began contacting people. Quietly. A real estate agent I'd met at a professional mixer 2 years ago. A lawyer recommended by Ivy, a financial advisor from a client referral who specialized in discreet relocations. The decision to sell the house wasn't impulsive. I had built that place from scratch, poured my life into it. It was supposed to be a symbol of achievement. Instead, it had become a monument to resentment. Selling it meant reclaiming every ounce of dignity they had stripped away under the guise of family obligations. I also opened a new bank account, one they couldn't access, one where no bills were auto-deducted to cover their phones, their groceries, their insurance, and I knew exactly where I wanted to go. 2 years earlier, I had traveled to Boulder, Colorado for a leadership seminar. It was a brief trip, but something about the place had imprinted itself on me. The wide open sky, the clean, cold air, the snow-capped peaks that made you feel small in a way that was comforting, not diminishing. We had wrapped the seminar early on the second day, and I'd taken a solo walk just as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The sky had turned a hue I couldn't name, somewhere between amber and rose, and the world was so still it made me feel like I was hearing the earth breathe. I'd stood in that silence for nearly an hour, something inside me settling without my permission. I hadn't wanted to leave. Now that memory became my compass. "You looked lighter when you talked about Boulder," Ivy said one night as we boxed up kitchenware in her apartment. "I think it's the only place I've ever felt free," I admitted. Freedom. That was the word. We paused to sip our tea and she asked gently, "Do you ever think maybe they loved you in the only way they knew how?" I turned that over in my mind. I've spent my whole life trying to interpret their version of love, trying to feel it in a way that makes sense to me. But now I think, I'm done translating. I want something that doesn't require me to work so hard to understand. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The quiet between us was filled with understanding. That night, while packing some winter clothes, I stumbled upon a scarf my mother had knitted for me during grad school. It was a soft gray with uneven stitches. Back then, I'd cherished it. I thought it meant she was proud of me. But now all I saw was a gesture meant to check a box, proof of care, not the thing itself. I folded it and placed it in the donation pile. Every drawer I opened held a test. Some things I discarded easily. Others, like my MBA graduation photo, gave me pause. My parents had shown up that day, smiling, clapping, but they left before the reception to attend Melody's baby shower. I'd told myself it was understandable. Now I knew better. By the end of that week, I had signed a buyer's agreement with a Seattle agent named Trina, who specialized in confidential listings. I also reconnected with a real estate agent in Boulder, Maya, who remembered me from my brief stay. She was warm and professional, immediately understanding the emotional stakes. "I want someplace quiet," I told her over the phone. "Close to hiking trails, minimal noise, and privacy." She didn't ask questions. "I have just the neighborhood in mind," she said. "That Friday I sent the first official inquiry for listing my home. It wasn't just real estate. It was my Declaration of Independence." While sorting through an old cabinet, I found a postcard I'd sent myself from Boulder. I had written it as a joke. "One day I'll come back and breathe here again." I stared at it for a long time, then pinned it to my corkboard as a promise. Later that week, I met with the attorney Ivy had recommended. Her name was Patricia, and she wore no makeup and spoke with a calm, commanding voice. After I explained the situation, she leaned back in her chair. "You're not being cruel," she said. "You're establishing boundaries. As sole owner of the property, you are well within your rights to sell. And if they refuse to leave, you'll need to begin formal eviction proceedings. But most people don't fight when they know they're in the wrong, especially if they've benefited for years." I nodded, feeling strangely validated. Every call, every form, every item boxed was a release. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. My own life. I had spent years surviving inside someone else's story, supporting them, protecting them, waiting for love that never came. Now I was writing my own, page by page, with no one editing behind my back, and for the first time in decades I felt it. Peace. The for sale sign went up on a Thursday afternoon. It was discreet, tasteful even. No bright colors or flashy text. Just a simple white placard staked into the front lawn, nestled between the hydrangeas Celeste had planted 2 summers ago. But the message was loud and unmissable. By the time she got home from work that evening, her parents were waiting. Douglas stood on the porch, arms crossed like a sentry. Elaine lingered by the doorway, her hands fluttering nervously at her sides. Their faces were tight with disbelief, fury, and something close to betrayal. The air was thick. "What the hell is this?" Douglas barked, gesturing at the sign. Celeste didn't flinch. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set her bag on the hallway table like it was any other Thursday. "I'm selling the house," she said calmly, evenly. Elaine's voice cracked. "You can't just throw us out. This is our home." "No," Celeste said, turning to face them. "It's mine." A beat of silence passed. Then Douglas exploded. "We are your family after everything we've done for you. This is how you repay us, abandoning your own parents." Celeste didn't yell back. Instead, she walked to the dining table where she'd laid out a manila folder earlier that morning. Without saying a word, she opened it, pulled out a crisp stack of printed spreadsheets, and slid them across the table toward him. "What's this?" Douglas snapped, though he didn't pick them up. Celeste answered softly, "That's every major expense I've covered for the last 3 years. Mortgage insurance, utilities, medical bills, car maintenance, groceries, cell phones, even Melody's kids' tuition. The total comes to over $181,000. Douglas snorted. "So what? That's what family does. We raised you, fed you, gave you a roof over your head. You fed me," Celeste said, meeting his eyes, "but you forgot my high school graduation. You said you were too tired from work, but I saw the fast food wrappers in the trash. You've never once remembered my birthday without someone reminding you? Meanwhile, you've never missed Melody's kids' parties or their school recitals or the date of their first flu shot." Douglas opened his mouth, but Elaine cut in. "That's not fair, Celeste. You're twisting things." Celeste turned to her mother. "Really? Then explain this. Do you remember the day I got promoted to senior financial planner? You were home. I told you at breakfast. You looked me in the eyes and said, 'That's nice, dear,' then asked me if I'd seen the coupons for bulk detergent." Elaine flushed. "You're being cruel." "No," Celeste said, voice still calm. "I'm being honest. For the first time in my life." Just then, Melody arrived, called no doubt to mediate. She stepped inside warily, glancing at the sign in the yard, then at Celeste. "What's going on? Mom said you were having some kind of breakdown." Celeste didn't answer. She handed Melody another document, this one a printed summary of her financial transfers. Melody's eyes scanned the page. Her jaw slackened. You've been paying Tyler's tuition. For the past 5 years, Celeste said, $500 a month direct to the school. Mom and Dad insisted they were handling it, but they came to me. Said you were struggling and they didn't want to stress you. So I helped. Melody stared at her stunned. I had no idea. I figured, Celeste said gently. It's not your fault. Douglas tried to regain control. This is absurd. You're painting us like villains when we did our best. Elaine nodded tearfully. We only ever wanted the best for our daughters. Then why, Celeste asked, did you tell people Melody was your real success? Elaine paled. I heard you, Celeste continued. 3 weeks ago. You forgot to hang up your call with Uncle Greg. I heard everything. You called me pathetic, said I should never have been born. Douglas looked away. Melody gasped. You talked about saving money while living in my house, joked about the Christmas watches being tasteless. I spent weeks picking those out. I was proud to give them to you. Douglas finally looked at her. You were eavesdropping. That was private. No, Celeste said. It was loud enough to echo through the entire hallway. And what I heard that day ended something in me. I realized I've spent my entire life chasing approval I never actually had. The room fell into a stunned silence. I'm not selling this house to hurt you, Celeste added, her voice softening. I'm selling it to save myself. I don't want to become bitter, I don't want to carry hate, but I won't keep letting you erase me. Elaine clutched her chest. So this is it. You're walking away. I'm choosing peace, Celeste said. Melody spoke again, her voice low. Where will they go? I don't know, Celeste admitted. And it's not that I don't care. I just can't carry it anymore. I've done enough. Douglas's face twisted. You've always been ungrateful. No, Celeste said. I've always been invisible. You just didn't notice. She turned to Melody. I hope we can find something better between us. But I'm done pretending this is okay. She picked up her folder, walked to the door, and paused. I don't hate you. I just finally love myself enough to stop begging to be seen. And with that, she walked out. Quietly, but with more power than any shout could carry. Celeste's first morning in Boulder began not with a blaring alarm or a to-do list, but with quiet sunlight pooling through gauzy curtains and the distant chirp of birds outside her new apartment window. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with a clenched chest or a sinking feeling in her stomach. Instead, she lay still, letting the softness of the sheets cradle her, and simply breathed. The apartment was smaller than the house she had left behind. Just 1 bedroom, a modest kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking a park. But it was hers. Every item she unpacked had been chosen deliberately: the ceramic mug from a trip to Mendocino, the framed photo of a misty Oregon coastline, the soft wool blanket she'd splurged on during a rough winter. Unlike her previous home, there were no loud footsteps overhead, no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, no tension hanging in the air like smoke. Here, peace wasn't a luxury. It was the default. Her first day at her new job at a private wealth firm in downtown Boulder surprised her. The team welcomed her with warmth and respect, but without the probing questions she had grown used to back in Seattle. No one asked if she had children or why she hadn't settled down. No one made assumptions about what a woman in her 30s should be doing with her life. Instead, her supervisor Nadine introduced her as a strategic thinker with a track record of clarity and care, words that landed on Celeste like a balm. She returned home that evening to the quiet hum of the mountain town, the air crisp and dry. As she walked the short path back from the co-op market, a man with salt-streaked hair and a canvas camera bag waved at her from the adjacent balcony. Hey, you just moved in, right? He called out with an easy grin. I'm Elias. I live next door. Celeste nodded. Just got here this weekend. I'm Celeste. Welcome, he said, holding up his coffee mug. If you ever want to trade city noise for mountain quiet, this is the place. Over the next few weeks, their casual greetings turned into shared walks along the trails, long conversations over pour-over coffee and quiet evenings, reading on their respective balconies. Elias was a freelance photographer who had once lived in Alicoa, but left after a bitter divorce and a realization that he'd been living someone else's dream. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't try to fix her. He simply listened and offered stories of his own. There was no pressure, no labels, just a sense of presence. And for Celeste, that was more than enough. One crisp Thursday afternoon, while sorting client documents in her home office, Celeste's phone buzzed. The caller ID read Melody. She paused before answering. Their conversations had grown more frequent, if still cautious. Hey, Celeste greeted her voice calm. Hey, Melody replied, exhaling sharply. I know this is out of the blue, but Mom and Dad, they're still with us. Celeste's stomach didn't tighten as it once would have. She just waited. They said it would be temporary, Melody continued, but it's been 2 months. Keith's been patient, but he's starting to get frustrated. They don't help with anything. They just exist. And it's like they expect us to rearrange everything around them. Celeste closed her laptop and leaned back. I'm sorry, Mel. I know how heavy that is. I don't know what to do. Melody confessed, her voice cracking. They're our parents, but it's like they don't see us as people, just extensions of what they need. Celeste let the silence linger before answering. You have the right to set boundaries, Melody. You don't owe them your stability. But they'll say I'm selfish, she whispered. Ungrateful. They'll say whatever they have to say to stay comfortable, Celeste said gently. But their comfort doesn't have to come at the cost of your peace. Melody was quiet for a long moment. I wish I had seen it sooner, she said finally. I didn't know how much you were holding before. It's not too late to make different choices, Celeste replied. You're allowed to prioritize your own well-being. It doesn't make you a bad daughter. It makes you a whole person. As they ended the call, Celeste stared out at the fading light beyond her balcony. The mountains stood silent and steady, their snow-dusted ridges glowing soft pink in the sunset. Her journey wasn't finished. There were still shadows she carried, still echoes of old guilt that sometimes knocked on her heart in the quiet. But for now, she had created something rare and sacred, a life that belonged to her. A rhythm that didn't ask for permission. And in that moment, she realized something else: she was no longer surviving. She was beginning, truly, finally, beginning. The first snow of December arrived quietly in Boulder, cloaking the streets in soft white, as if the world itself were inviting Celeste to pause and reflect. Her new apartment, modest, sunlit, and unmistakably hers, smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine. It was her first Christmas in this new chapter, and she was determined to make it her own. That morning, her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen since she left Seattle. She stared at it for a moment, her father's name glowing on the screen like a memory she'd boxed up but hadn't thrown away. Against her better judgment, she answered. Celeste Douglas, said his voice, quieter than she remembered, but unmistakably calculated. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Dad, she replied, keeping her tone neutral. There was a pause. Then he went on as if rehearsed. Things have been tough. The rent at Melody's place is going up, and your mother's got that knee problem again. You know how it is this time of year. Expenses everywhere. Celeste didn't speak. She waited. I wouldn't ask if it weren't necessary, he continued. But we're family. And family helps each other, right? She closed her eyes, letting the words settle. There it was, The line. The appeal to blood obligation guilt. The assumption that she would still be the person she had been all her life, dependable, self-erasing, silent. "Dad," she said gently, "I'm still your daughter. But I'm not your bank." Silence. "I hope you and Mom find what you need." "Truly. But I'm building something new now, something that doesn't run on guilt and one-sided giving." He didn't respond. After a few awkward words and a clipped goodbye, the call ended. Celeste sat for a moment, phone still in hand, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It didn't feel cruel. It felt clean. That evening, the little apartment glowed with golden light and quiet music. She'd invited a few colleagues and neighbors for a small Christmas Eve dinner. Nothing extravagant, just good food, laughter, and the warmth of chosen company. Elias arrived early, with mulled wine and a potted rosemary plant shaped like a tree. "Smells like something between a forest and a roast chicken," he joked, setting it on her windowsill. The table filled slowly with people who had only known her for a short time, but already treated her with more curiosity and kindness than her own family ever had. They shared stories, passed dishes, and toasted to new beginnings that actually feel like beginnings. Later that night, after the last glass was washed, and the last guest had hugged her goodbye, Celeste stepped onto the balcony, wrapped in a thick sweater and holding a mug of tea. Snow was falling again, gentle and steady like it had all the time in the world. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A video call from Melody. She hesitated, then answered. Her sister's face filled the screen, cheeks flushed, children laughing in the background. "Merry Christmas, Cell," Melody said, holding the camera so her kids could shout their greetings. Celeste's heart softened. "Hi, Auntie Celeste. We made cookies. Mom says you live near the mountains now." For the first time in years, the call felt easy. No pressure, no comparisons, no hovering voices in the background. Just two sisters talking, connecting, choosing each other. As they chatted, Celeste noticed a small envelope on her desk. She picked it up absently, recognizing her mother's handwriting. The envelope was unsealed, folded neatly. She turned it over in her hand. "Are you going to open it?" Melody asked, having seen it on the screen. Celeste looked at the snow falling, then back at her sister. "No," she said with a soft smile. "I don't need to." The camera wobbled as one of the kids pulled Melody's arm and they both laughed. Celeste promised to visit sometime in spring, maybe meet halfway for a hike. They ended the call with no promises, no pressure, just warmth. As the wind whispered through the pines beyond her balcony, Celeste stood in the hush of the night, the envelope still unopened in her hand. She didn't need an apology carved in ink. She didn't need explanations that would never satisfy. She had chosen peace, and peace didn't require permission. And for the first time, her heart wasn't a room others borrowed. It was a home, and it was hers. If you've ever found yourself being the one who gives, who holds it all together, while no one asks how you're holding up, this story was for you. Celeste's journey might feel familiar, not because every detail matches your own, but because that quiet ache of being unseen, unacknowledged, is something many of us have carried. Maybe you've also stood at the edge of choosing peace over pleasing. Maybe you've learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved, just to finally come back to yourself? Have you ever learned that sometimes healing means drawing a line, not building another bridge? If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, reflective, and rooted in real emotion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There's so much more to share, and I'd be honored to have you with us on this journey. Until next time, take care of your heart. It was never meant to carry everything for everyone.